Well, hello. Welcome everybody to the next edition of the APDA Northwest Beyond Medication series. This one is called Cognitive Fitness. We are very excited to have a Zoom room full of people. And those of you watching this recording, thank you for tuning in. The Beyond Medication series, my name is Jen Gillick, and I am the program director at the Northwest chapter of the American Parkinson Disease Association. This this is probably the sixth in our series of Beyond Medication. The idea behind it is to give some practical skill building informational techniques to help improve life with Parkinson's disease. So we've done things like nutrition, we've done things like powering up your voice, we've done things like beat the freeze, and now we are going to focus on cognitive fitness. So this will be a 4-week series. They are intended to build upon each other. So we hope you will tune in every week. If you are not able to, though, these will be archived on our YouTube channel and you'll be able to tune in. We will share the slides with you so that you can see the slides. And we also hope this will be an interactive program and that you will ask questions as we go. So for those of you who are here live, you can use the chat function for your questions. You also could raise your virtual hand if you know how to do that, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question when we open up for questions and answers. So we are glad that you are here, and I am going to welcome to the screen here Dr. Karen Torres. So Dr. Torres is a neuropsychologist at University of Washington Medical Center here in Seattle. She has a wealth of experience in Parkinson's and other neurological disorders. And so we're very excited to have Karen here. When Karen and I were chatting about doing a series, and I said, I just was thinking about things that you can do to improve your cognition. And she's like, you're speaking my language. So I'm very excited that you are here to put together this series and share this information. So thank you, Karen, very much.
All right.
Or
Thank you
Dr.
very
Torres, whatever I want to call you.
Karen is fine. Karen is fine. Thank you very much. All right.
Perfect. So I am
I,
going to disappear and be on mute, but I will be the wizard behind the curtains should you need anything or should any of the folks who are watching need anything. So we'll see you at the end of the program.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I do want to thank you, Jen, and the APDA for inviting me to talk on this very important topic that is very close to my heart. So I've been working with the APDA for many years now, talking in the community about not only, the cognitive aspects of Parkinson's disease, but also intervention and what you can do to keep your brains healthy. As a neuropsychologist, my focus is to evaluate how people's brains are functioning with relation to cognitive abilities. Those include things like your memory, your language, um, problem solving, attention, you name it, and seeing how people's abilities change because of Parkinson's disease, or if people are interested in going through deep brain stimulation or other surgical interventions to help determine whether or not they're good candidates for that surgery. Thank you very much to everyone for joining me today. Let's see, move these along. So, a little bit of an overview for the next 4 weeks. Today's topic will be focusing on lifestyle factors that impact your brain function. That will be the focus of this week. Week 2, which is next week, will really focus on executive function. So, understanding how this very common difficulty in Parkinson's disease, one of the most common challenges that people with Parkinson's disease face, what it is, and what you can do in everyday life to improve on this specific ability. Week 3, we'll have a discussion about mood and emotions and how that also can impact brain function, and figuring out strategies and learning strategies to help alleviate some of those difficulties that people may be having in everyday life. And then the fourth week will be focused on cognitive training. You know, given that we will learn a lot about lifestyle and specific cognitive difficulties that people with Parkinson's have, mood issues, the last week will be focused on specific strategies for maintaining your brain healthy as long as possible. So today's week, we'll talk about lifestyle factors and really focus on things like exercise, nutrition, and sleep. And I'm glad that you've already had previous series that have focused on nutrition, but I will talk about it again briefly, but really as how it impacts your brain function. After my brief presentation, we'll open it up to discussions where I'm interested in hearing any comments or questions about anything that I've talked about today. And then we'll just discuss about things I'm recommending you can do in the next week that will hopefully helpful for you in understanding how current lifestyle can be improved or modified, or maybe you're doing just great. And we'll talk about that then. Okay, so here's the first question, and feel free to raise your hand if you think the response is yes. Okay, question: do we have the capacity to influence our brains with our behavior? Okay, can we change our brains by the things we do in every life? Yes or no? Okay, I see some hands being raised. Good. Okay. I wouldn't be here if the answer was no. So we're off to a great start. Okay. So yes, there's definitely a way to keep your brain healthy by the things you do in everyday life. And how do we know this? I always refer to this classic study. Okay. So this is where we started learning a lot about how lifestyle impacts brain function. And it was through our friends, the rats, through various animal studies. But very briefly, these studies looked at rats in different living conditions. So we have a standard condition where there's, three rats, they have shelter, they have food. The impoverished condition where there's a single rat, it has shelter, it has food and water. And then we have the enriched condition. And here we see community. We see lots of rats. We see activity. We see shelter. We see food. And so when people investigated the brains of these rats in this research study, which rats do you think had the strongest brains, the most robust brains, the neuronal connections were stronger? It was the rats in the enriched condition. So even back in the 60s, we started learning that there's something about lifestyle, about the environment that you live in, and and how challenged you are that can keep your brain healthy than if you didn't do these things. So my next question for the group is, do we have the capacity to influence our brains with our behavior despite having a neurological disease? So with Parkinson's disease, do you still have the capacity to change your brain function? Raise your hand if the answer is yes. Excellent. I'm seeing a lot of hands raising, which is amazing, because the message is very likely, but it's not me saying it. There has been research to suggest that the answer may be yes. So I'll talk about this one study that came out last year very briefly. So this study followed over 500 people across the span of 25 years. Okay. And these people either had good lifestyle, like a healthy lifestyle, or an unhealthy lifestyle. And they investigated their cognitive function up until death. When this group of people died, their brains were investigated to see if there was any disease in their brain related to Alzheimer's disease, vascular disease, Lewy body disease, etc. So this is the conclusion from the study, and I'll quote it. This study found that a healthier lifestyle was associated with better cognitive function proximate to death, independently of common neuropathologies of dementia, suggesting that lifestyle factors may provide cognitive reserve to maintain cognitive abilities in older adults. So, in a nutshell, this study found that among people who had a healthy lifestyle, their cognitive abilities stayed much stronger than people who did not have a healthy lifestyle and may have had the same burden of neurological disease in their brains. Things like Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body disease, vascular disease. So even though these folks had these diseases in their brain, they were still able to show cognitive resilience because they led a healthy lifestyle, which is quite wonderful finding. So, how did they define a healthy lifestyle? So, people who had a healthy lifestyle had a score on the Mind Diet survey, and have we'll talk about the Mind Diet because it's one of the areas of focus for today's talk. But the Mind Diet includes foods like very dark green leafy foods, berries, nuts, fish, etc. So it's a healthy diet. People with a healthy lifestyle were also cognitively active. They read every day, they visited museums, they played games, etc. People with a healthy lifestyle were non-smokers. They drank very minimal alcohol, okay, and engaged in moderate to vigorous exercise, up to 150 minutes per week, okay? So this is how they classified a healthy lifestyle. And so when we try to tease this apart a bit further, we'll talk about physical exercise, okay? So I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a neuropsychologist, okay? But we know that physical exercise is important in Parkinson's disease. Not only in Parkinson's disease, but for any individual living. Physical exercise, aerobic exercise is important because it gives oxygen to your heart and your brain, okay? Those two organs need oxygen to function, okay? And aerobic exercise like fast-paced walking, running on a treadmill, or swimming is a good example of aerobic exercise. And in Parkinson's disease specifically, it has been shown that regular aerobic exercise improves motor functioning, the motor symptoms of Parkinson's, but also cognitive ability. Okay, so research has revealed these findings or consistently shown. And the cognitive abilities that are beneficial from aerobic exercise tend to do with improving attention, how well you're able to concentrate, how quickly you're able to process information, and also executive function, making decisions, thinking flexibly, and so forth. So aerobic exercise, if your medical provider says is a good recommendation for you, is something that should be considered as part of exercise. But not all exercise has to be aerobic exercise. Okay. We know that for Parkinson's patients, for example, boxing is an exercise that is highly recommended. Okay. And it's highly recommended because it taps into different types of activity and wellness. When you're boxing, okay, the boxing requires the learning of a regimented exercise program, remembering movements, practicing repetitive movements. It helps with balance and strengthening your walk and stability. It's a full body workout, right? And it tests agility, hand-eye coordination. All of this is not only providing good exercise, but it's working out your brain. And it increases muscle tone, and it's a very, very good source of releasing frustration. Okay. And importantly, in the research, it has been supported that this is a good exercise for improving symptoms among Parkinson's patients. But there's also mind body exercises. And things like Tai Chi and yoga have been, again, proven to be effective in improving coordination and balance in people with Parkinson's disease. But these mind body exercise hold a closer connection to emotions, to mental acuity, being able to meditate. And we're seeing that these exercises not only are good for your physical health and your motor health, but also for the emotional aspect of one's being. It can help with sleep. It can help with, feeling more motivated, all of which are a good source for improving overall fitness. So we'll tap into sleep as part of physical fitness. Sleep is by far one of the most important activities for you to do to remain cognitively strong. However, we know that sleep may be challenging for Parkinson's patients for a variety of reasons. It could be due to their motor symptoms, feeling very uncomfortable, lying down, symptoms wake them up in the middle of the night, you name it. It's one of the areas that can be problematic in Parkinson's disease. And we also have to note that REM sleep behaviors are a type of sleep disorder that interferes with sleep. So, acting out your dreams, moving excessively, yelling, that's compromising your sleep. But we know that sleep is by far one of the most important physical behaviors because it has a very close relationship to your cardiovascular health. Okay. So, sleep is important for how well your heart functions. Okay. How much you're regulating glucose is tied to heart disease, etc. Sleep is important for your emotional health. We've all been there. If there are nights that we don't get good sleep, the next day we're not feeling very good. We're not feeling very chipper. We're not in a good mood. So sleep is very closely tied to your emotional well-being and importantly to your cognitive health. Okay. If we have a very poor night's sleep, the chances of us waking up the next morning and feeling completely alert and being able to take in new information and process quicker is much less likely if we've had a terrible night's sleep. Okay. But sleep specifically is important for memory. Without sleep, all of that information we learned the day of, okay, so all of the conversations we've had, all the chapter in the book we read before we went to sleep, if we do not sleep, the likelihood of us taking this information that we learned that day and registering it to that part of the brain that will keep it there is very less likely because memory does not get consolidated. So if you think about it this way, new information that we learn, so let's say we have a conversation and there's details, this is called encoding, taking in of the information. This is what we need when we're awake, when we're alert, taking in this information because we need to listen to it, we need to understand it, we need to pay attention to it. That can only happen when we're awake. So we take in this new information, but this new information is vulnerable because it's very new. It's a baby information. So it's vulnerable to other stimuli, interruptions, forgetfulness, etc. So we're taking this very vulnerable information with us to sleep. And it's in sleep that the brain it needs has the capacity to take this very vulnerable new information and register it, consolidate it to that part of the brain that holds memories into the longer term. Okay? Without sleep, this does not happen. Without sleep, we cannot hold on to the information we learned that day or even days before and remember it in the long term. So, this is why sleep is very closely associated with memory loss and forgetfulness, because the brain does not get the opportunity to rest, to recharge, and to consolidate that information it needs to do that can only happen when we fall asleep. Okay. Certainly for people with Parkinson's disease, especially those who have REM sleep behavior disorders where their sleep is being compromised by the acting out behaviors, we know that having REM sleep behavior disorder can increase your risk for cognitive impairment. And this is a perfect example of why that may happen. Because if your sleep is disturbed by the acting out and the yelling, your brain doesn't have the opportunity to consolidate the information from the day before. And so by the next morning, recalling details, recalling what you read in that book chapter becomes much more challenging. Okay? So sleep is imperative. Ways that sleep difficulties are addressed are through sleep hygiene approaches, behavioral interventions. Okay. So developing a routine for sleep is imperative. So that will include doing the same things every night in the same manner as much as you can. Choosing a time where you will go to bed. If you feel more relaxed taking a bath before bed, do it, but do it every night. Okay. Using your bed just for sleep, not for watching TV, not for watching the iPad or working on a crossword, using the bed just for sleep, limiting naps. And I know that in Parkinson's, naps can be wonderful because they can help recharge you in the midday. Naps are fine as long as they try not to stretch them for longer than 30 minutes. Okay? And other things like limiting electronic devices. If you're tossing and turning, if you can't sleep, stop watching the clock, get up and do something very briefly. People will drink a glass of warm milk, just go up, get up, use a restroom, just breaking that cycle of monotony when you're trying to fall asleep can be helpful. The idea for sleep is that you need to be tired. Your brain needs to be tired. Your body needs to be tired so that it can fall asleep. So if you're someone who likes to do exercise, do it early in the day so that you're kind of worn out by the end of the day. But for other folks, they prefer to do it at the end of the day because it wears them out and then sleep. So finding that niche of what works for you is important. Avoiding alcohol and coffee in the evening, especially anytime after 4 p.m. is imperative. For me, coffee, if I drink it afternoon, I can't sleep. So I load up in the morning and limit my coffee intake in the evening. But alcohol, sometimes it's difficult to not, if you like a glass of wine with dinner, that can compromise the quality of your sleep. And importantly, if you snore, especially if it's pretty significant, see a doctor. Because we're seeing more and more, at least, in our area of neurology, how obstructive sleep apnea, which is when you're snoring so much that oxygen is not getting to your brain as efficiently, is a big source of cognitive impairment. So if you snore, if you're finding yourself waking up short of breath, or if you're waking up feeling exhausted and easily doze off in the middle of the day. All of those things are worth mentioning to your doctor to see if you need some more evaluation of sleep issues. But sleep is important. Okay. And then the last thing we'll touch on is nutrition. Your brain is an organ that needs nutrients. Okay. So think about everything you ingest will affect your brain. And diets influence your heart health, through, if you eat a lot of fatty foods, for example, a lot of carbs can lead to heart disease, cholesterol, diabetes, and so forth. Okay. That's how your nutrition affects your vascular or your heart health. In Parkinson's disease, there has been research out there that diets like the MIND diet or the Mediterranean diet that rely on vegetables, fish, healthy fats, and nuts, for example, have been shown to be beneficial with maybe slowing down the progression of the disease because it's eliminating all of the antioxidants and into anti-inflammatory substances that are bad for your gut health. Okay. And there's research to support this. There's research to support that a good diet leads to better overall functioning in Parkinson's disease. But in Parkinson's disease, people may struggle with having the best diet because of their motor symptoms. There's concerns about that fine line between protein and medication interactions. A reduced sense of smell can lead to a reduced sensation of taste. And so maybe oversalting food or relying on very high sugar, sweet foods to get some sort of taste, but also with things like constipation or difficulty swallowing. Okay? So while the guidelines for having a good diet are there, how much you're able to do this is dependent on how Parkinson's affects you and your ability to engage in these diets and so forth. So it's always important to check with your physicians or a nutritionist to get suggestions on how to improve on this aspect. But a specific diet that has been proven to be effective in slowing down degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease or preventing or lowering the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And there's definitely have been studies that have looked at the MIND diet and how it affects Parkinson's disease and slowing down the progression. So the MIND diet is a combination of the Mediterranean and DASH diets. So it's technically called the Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay, MIND, which is a hybrid of these two diets. And it was developed and investigated several years ago at Rush University. And the study found that incorporating these, it says 10, but I will say 9 because back then wine was included as part of the 10 things you should include. But it's no longer the case, especially in more recent months with the recommendation that even moderate levels of alcohol is healthy. That's no longer the case. So when we talk about the MIND diet, wine is no longer included there. But including these 9 things into your diet is key. And the suggested servings are included here. So for example, 6 servings weekly of green leafy vegetables. So these are the dark colored greens, kale, collards, broccoli, that sort of thing. Other vegetables, of course, at least 1 a day. Nuts and berries, beans and whole grains, fish and poultry, olive oil. And then there's 5 things you should limit. And, like with everything, it doesn't say completely eliminate, but definitely limit things like, red meat, limiting them to less than 4 servings per week. Butter and cheese, all the fun stuff, pastries and sweets, fried and fast foods. Definitely taking consideration of limiting these foods is part of the mind diet. And you'll see that at the end of the slides. I have all of these resources included in part of the slides. So you will have links to the studies that I've included. This, this sheet from the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center talking about the mind diet will be available to you. Okay, all right. So we can stop here for open discussion questions. I'm happy to engage with anyone who may have some questions, and then we'll round back to maybe talking about some recommendations of what you can do in the next week.
All right, Karen, do you want to unshare your slide and we'll get a whole world view? Well, we'll get you at least without the slide.
Excellent.
So Dawn has raised her hand. So Dawn, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Oh, you got to unmute yourself. I don't hear you yet. I still don't hear you. Try again. You were unmuted, but now you're muted again. Let's try it again.
How about now?
Oh, perfect. Great.
So there's been a lot of discussion about milk, like low-fat milk, because you've got your milk drinkers and then you've got your fake dairy prefer people. And so what are your thoughts first on is like 2% milk okay with the mind diet? And then the other question would be, do you recommend like the oat milk, soy milk, that kind of thing, because it could be considered processed food?
So with the mind diet, there is a focus on nuts. And so theoretically, nut-based milks would fall into this category. How it's processed, the mind diet has less to say about that. So it could be a positive. But there is a lot to say about dairies and even whole milk, 2% milk, being not necessarily bad for you. So if you prefer dairy, going the 2% route can be much better than whole milk. But then if you really dig in deep, there's studies that say that maybe whole milk, because or any of the milks, dairy milks coming from dairy farms, and what's exactly happening in these dairy farms with how these foods are being handled and with what chemicals, that's a whole different discussion. Yeah.
And I do think I can talk from some of the nutrition side with Parkinson's that people have talked about. There are a lot of, it depends on who you ask about dairy and Parkinson's and whether you should consume dairy or not consume dairy. So because there is some research that does suggest that dairy can that people who are consuming dairy, their progression of their disease is sped up. So it's really that the research is still not 100%. It keeps changing, as Terry just put into the chat, that it does change, unfortunately.
And it's not entirely consistent, even across studies, across organizations. It's never consistent. No one's ever on the same page, unfortunately.
Yeah. So Ruth has her hand up. Ruth?
Is peanut butter considered highly processed and not recommended?
Well, it depends the type of peanut butter as well, right? So if it's just peanut butter, especially if you're grinding it up yourself, then it's minimally processed. There's nothing being added to it. It's a healthy fatty oil, which would put it in the plus section for the mind diet.
Thank you.
I don't know
Yeah, go
how
ahead.
to say it.
I see your hand. Steve Susan.
I don't know how to do it with the computer. What about probiotics, since the gut is so much involved in Parkinson's?
You know, I have not seen a lot of outcome data on probiotics. So there is this theory that with Parkinson's disease, the gut biome is a huge factor in maybe the development of the disease, certainly in the progression of the disease. But I am less familiar with probiotics as far as the outcome research. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts, Jen.
A lot of the talks that I have heard on nutrition, because there is such a vast difference in probiotics, which is sort of like the stuff that you're feeding your gut, there's a lot of focus on prebiotics. So eating the foods that actually build the gut biome up naturally. So things like fermented foods, the cabbages, the kimchis, the things like that really helps develop that in a natural way versus artificially putting these probiotics in through like a pill or a drink thing. So again, it's one of those things that it depends on who you talk to, whether they're promoting it. So, but any way that you can feed your gut through natural means, like through nutrition and food versus supplements, is a good thing to do. And sometimes you do need to add supplements, but any way that you can have those healthy diets, those well-rounded diets can be good. Yeah. And so in the chat, there's a couple of things. I had said that Terry made a comment about diets keep changing. How many years in a study before the change kind of becomes official? You know how things go back and forth. And I'm going to put myself as a spotlight so I'm not the ghost behind the curtain. Go ahead.
Can you repeat the question,
Oh,
Jen?
sorry. Yeah. About how many years, so things keep changing. How many years and how many studies happen before we're like, this is the thing that you should avoid dairy or you should drink a glass of red wine?
I would say answering that question is close to impossible because research studies are very different. They, for example, study different milks and for different amounts of period at different quantities. So it would be ideal for these research studies to be, observational studies with the same requirements for the study, the same criteria, the same number of patients, same age ranges, same disease severity, for example, the same diets used in a protocol. And that's just not the case. The best we get is studies that do a systematic review of all of the studies that have investigated milk and Parkinson's disease, for example. They'll look at all of these studies. Let's say they start with 100, but then they want to look for consistency. And so the studies start dwindling down. And by the end of the review, there's 20 studies that are similar that can be compared to each other. And so they come up with these conclusions, and at the end of the day, it's limited. Again, they'll say it's limited because of the lack of consistency. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other piece that is a variable is the funding for a study that, big pharma is not going to study carrots, like that is, it's really hard to get studies in nutrition to be done and funded because a lot of our funding of research comes from, something that's going to be a medication. And so it can be very difficult to do that. And I did listen to an NPR article recently about this nutrition study being done at the NIH, but it was so small because they kept people in this super controlled environment and super controlled on what they fed them and what they, gave them to drink and all this kind of stuff. And that's not just that, you can't replicate that in the world. And so it's really hard to do that in those closed environments.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of questions that still go on the nutrition thing, and I want to put an aside in here that we will, number one, there is a YouTube video called, and it was the first one we did about nutrition, called 4 Weeks to Pro PD, based on some of Dr. Mishley's nutritional stuff and just advice on that. And that does say a lot of things about nutrition. And we are also going to do another one on nutrition, might be the next one, either in the summer or in the fall. So just stay tuned for that, because we will have someone who is an expert in nutrition talking about, and she's going to be talking about the protein factor, and she's going to be talking about alternatives to dairy and things like that.
That's
So
great.
that is coming up. So one of the questions from Barbara, hello, Barbara. I know Barbara. Oh shoot, now I lost her study. Something about encoding. Is encoding another term for working memory? And how does one improve the working memory?
Yeah. So great question, because next week the topic is executive function, which includes working memory. So encoding requires basic auditory attention. Okay. Are you taking in the information, for one? Working memory is taking in the information and manipulating it in some way. That's what makes this initial information that you're learning stronger. So for example, you're learning someone's name. Hi, my name is Karen. Karen like Sharon. If you do that, that's working memory, because you're adding another layer to just taking in the information. You're manipulating it somehow. You're connecting it to something else. So yes, making that connection will make this new information less vulnerable, because you're trying to make a connection. So that's the key, is when you're taking this information from new to old, and that's just a matter of hours, because once you go to sleep and you consolidate this new memory, it becomes an old memory, a registered memory. The working memory is key, because you need to figure out how to make this new information less vulnerable, and working memory is a way of doing that.
Great. There was a question about eggs. Do you know anything about eggs? What about eggs?
I mean, it's a good source of protein, right? And that's a big, there's a huge push towards protein now, especially in older populations, especially protein for women, right? Because it helps against osteoporosis and making you stronger and so forth. But it's in that basket of dairy as well. So.
Well, and that is going to be one, I have seen the outline for our next 4-week series on nutrition. And one of the core things will be that protein factor, because we know that protein in Parkinson's, it can be hard to balance getting enough protein if you are taking carbidopa-levodopa, because for some people that can interact. So, so Kelly, the nutritionist, is going to address that in the piece. So great. So other questions from you all in the audience about, Karen talked about exercise in helping with building the brain, talked about the nutritional things that we've really focused on, because of course that was the last thing we talked about.
Yeah.
Are there other healthy lifestyle pieces? I think about the idea of building neuroplasticity and how you do that. And do you want to talk a little bit about that, or do you want to, or is that coming up later in this session?
So it's definitely going to come later. So there'll be the heavy focus on week 4 when we talk about, okay, we've learned a lot about lifestyle factors that impact brain and cognitive function, emotional health, cognitive health. So neuroplasticity is the learning, the new learning. So everything that we've talked about, how can you take this information and implement it into your everyday life? Because plasticity can continue to be done, and that's strengthening of the neurons, strengthening of the connections in your brain, can continue to be done throughout one's life. Meaning, if you learn something new, neuroplasticity is happening. So your brain is staying healthy. So everything that we talk about in week 4, we're going to see how do we implement this in everyday life to encourage neuroplasticity.
Great, great. Another question from the chat. And this is open to you, Karen, and it's also open to other people in, this is an interactive thing. So if you have any thoughts and suggestions, because sometimes the people who are on these sessions learning have so much expertise.
Yeah.
So share it, please. So what do others do to help with sleep? Melatonin, this individual is taking 5 grams of melatonin to get to sleep, and then a Delta 9 gummy, which I think might be CBD. I'm not sure. You'll have to tell us, Carol, to stay asleep. And that normally gets Carol about 5 hours. Are there other things that people have found to help with sleep? And what do you think about, first, my question for you, Karen, is do you have any suggestions beyond that? And what have you heard in your practice on ways that help people get to sleep and then stay asleep?
So definitely, well, we've talked about those sleep hygiene strategies. So as a psychologist, I'm very into behavioral modifications because I'm not a medical doctor, I'm less so on the medications and supplements and so forth, because we know there's something now called cognitive behavioral therapy insomnia. And that's therapy for people who struggle with sleep difficulties, initiating sleep, maintaining sleep, for example. And so this cognitive behavioral therapy really focuses on, okay, what is going on while you're trying to sleep? Are you ruminating on worries, on what's happening tomorrow, on what's happened in the past? Are you worried about this topic and then it bounces to that topic and then it becomes a big worry? So it's really trying to get at the behavioral aspect of what's preventing your brain from shutting off. And again, bringing in those interventions to help with us building a routine, building a habit in everyday life is the key. It's the key to getting things done, the key to falling asleep, etc.
I've had a very weird experience regarding sleep in like the last 2 months. I've been very consistent about going to bed at the same time, and I am now waking up consistently without an alarm, in time to go to work, in time to do all this stuff. And it's never happened to me in my life. And I'm like, I wonder if it's because I'm going to bed so consistently on a weekday, and then I'm just waking up at a normal time and having not problems with it. And so that was a behavioral change that I've done recently. And I'm like, wow, it actually works. That's weird.
Because they say that it's best to try to train your body with the behavior of the sun, right? When the sun's down, go to sleep. When the sun's up, wake up. And it argues against people who say, well, I'm a night owl. I do my best work at night. When you start having sleep difficulties, and this has been your lifelong habit, they say, okay, maybe it's time you retrain your body to the circadian rhythm with the sun and light and so forth.
It's really interesting. So Jim, you've got your hand raised.
I did. I was just, for what it's worth, going to contribute a couple of things I found that helped me with sleep. So one, I don't know if you call this sleep hygiene or not, but I have a white noise generator that sort of plays. It sounds kind of like a waterfall. I think they probably call it like rain or something, but sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll hear this and I can sort of go back to sleep by imagining I'm sleeping by a waterfall. I don't know. It's kind of nice. And quite often before sleep, I'll just call it a meditative session where I just kind of do a body scan. There's different types of meditations I do, but that's usually one. And that kind of helps me like shed stress and kind of get ready for sleep. I don't know. They help me anyway.
Yeah, those are wonderful strategies. Behavioral, strategies of visualization, right? You resting next to a waterfall. Meditation helps you tune into what your body's feeling, what your brain is feeling as well. And so those are very, very important for that help with sleep.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Jim. There's a lot of apps out there that, like the Calm app and things that people have used to really help with that, and that can talk them through this meditation thing if their brain is too spinny. Linda, you've raised your hand as well.
Thank you. To add to what's already been shared, which is really valuable information, I have chosen an album that's very calming cello music, and I put that on to like it almost triggers the knowledge that, or understanding that it's time to kind of settle down and to get ready for bed. And it really helps me a lot.
Absolutely. And similar to, again, building a routine, repetition is a good thing for improving sleep. And you can think about it as, when you're in a hotel and you get turn down service, when, your bed is prepared and you have a drink of water, just really, really training your brains like, okay, sleepy time is coming. So let's do the things that make me feel good, make me feel relaxed, and sleep hopefully will improve afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So somebody typed in the chat about some medications that they've been prescribed to help with sleep, some trazodone and some quetiapine with the trazodone, and then some Restoral and some melatonin. So I don't know what, other than melatonin, I guess I sort of have heard of those things. So,
Yeah.
And then she tries not to use cell phone or before bed and read a book instead. So getting out that blue light stuff.
Yeah. And something else, if you are struggling in the middle of the night with waking up and you're tossing and turning, the key is to get up and do something monotonous, not overly stimulating. So don't get on that computer and start responding to emails. Just try to do something boring, something brief, and then go back to bed.
Great. Any other burning questions? We're sort of coming to the end of our time.
Yeah.
Oh, Qigong, breath work, magnesium, helping with sleep. Some suggestions that have come in. Great. All right. Do you want to talk about the
Yes.
the
things
next
to do.
week's assignments, things to do? Let's not call it
Yeah.
homework, but it kind of is.
Well, it's a little bit like homework, but things to try this week. Okay. So I would really like for you to start off with journaling. Okay. And looking into the different elements that we talked about. So sleep, for example, you don't have to journal about it every day. Let's shoot for 5 to 7 nights. Take notes on how many hours of sleep you're getting. Okay? Take notes on how you feel physically and emotionally upon waking up. Okay? And we're trying to figure out if there's patterns with your sleep. How many hours? How is it making you feel? And identifying maybe any triggers that are interfering with your sleep. Observe your diet. So these slides you'll have access to it. So you'll have, the Mind Diet criteria in one of the slides. Take a look at it and see how much you're incorporating already into your diet. And where is there room for improvement? I'd love to hear, from you. And we'll begin next week's conversation with, people, volunteering what they learned. But I want to hear what you're already doing and where do you see room for improvement? Because again, there's room for improvement for all of us and incorporating, and we want to hear your ideas of how you've thought about it. And also exercise. Keep track of what you're doing now and make goals of where you feel you can improve with exercise. Again, as long as your doctor has given you the go ahead to do these types of things. But like we discussed, there's a lot of different types of exercise, not just aerobic exercise, but there's meditation, there's Tai Chi, there's yoga, and all of these can be available online. So this assignment, quote unquote, is essentially, I want you to start just thinking about these 3 areas and making an effort to really try to figure out, what am I currently doing? And is there room for improvement? Because there's no right or wrong answer. There's not a yes or no answer. it's just about being mindful and figuring out, okay, how can I improve? So we'll begin next week's topic with a brief discussion on people's experiences with journaling in these areas. And then next week, we'll be talking about executive function, okay? The one area of cognitive difficulty that is the most prevalent in people with Parkinson's disease. So that includes, being organized and planning and thinking flexibly, initiating activities. So we'll talk about what it is and specific strategies for improving executive function in everyday life.
Awesome. I look forward to hearing that. I know there's lots of questions out there about executive function. So thank you, Dr. Torres. Thank you for sharing all of this. For all of you, you will get a post-program email in the next few days. Let's say by Monday, end of day, you will get, and that'll have a link to Karen's slides, as well as a link to where the YouTube video is, because this will be saved on YouTube for revisiting. And then I will be also sending a reminder about the next session to you, but is the same Zoom link you used today and same time, same day, Thursdays at 11 p.m. Pacific time. So thank you so much to everyone for coming and for engaging in questions. And thank you, Dr. Torres, Karen, for sharing all your information. So everyone have a lovely day. Have a lovely weekend. It's Mother's Day, isn't it? So enjoy your weekend and we will see you next week. Take care, everyone.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.